Hey everybody, today we're going to be looking at the Ming Dynasty, and this is in period 4, 1450 to 1750. But you'll notice that the Ming Dynasty actually starts in period 3 and sort of overlaps into period 4. But what we're going to be focusing on really is what's called, a reemergence of China as a powerful entity in the world, and we're going to look at it in 3 phases. The first one is going to be the recovery and repair of Confucian China, the rebuilding of a dynasty, and then we're going to take a look at the reconnaissance to create an empire. So where does it all begin with the Ming? Well, it begins with the end of the Mongol rule, the Yuan dynasty. It was led by Kublai Khan, but there were many problems going on in China during his rule and towards the end of his rule. Number one, there was a nasty plague. The Black Death started in China and devastated the Chinese. The Mongols also suffered from failed attacks in Japan and in Southeast Asia. And there was corruption running rampant, especially after the death of Kublai Khan. His successors just weren't strong enough to keep a lid on everything. And therefore, the scholar gentry started to rebel, the peasant class did not like the high taxes, and everyone in China wanted to get rid of these foreigners. The first step of this recovery and repair was to take over power. And during this very messy time, there were lots of rebellions. But the one man that would step up, the one guy that would take it all back, would be this guy, Zhu Yuanzhang. That's right. And he was just a peasant boy who grew to become the Emperor of China. Sounds like a movie. Yes. That would be an awesome movie. Now, Zhu Yuanzhang's story is rather unique and pretty inspirational. When he becomes Emperor of China, he takes the name Han Wu. So you need to know him as the Emperor Han Wu. And in order to really recover and repair and to create this new dynasty, he looked to the past to enhance the future. So he's going to be really revitalizing, rediscovering Confucianism. The Mongols took away the civil service exams and ended Confucian ideals. So this is a rebirth of Confucian ideals going back to the Tang and the Song dynasties. Okay, so we can compare this later on to the Renaissance in Europe, a rebirth of Greco-Roman ideals at that time. And so what does he do? He needs to recover order and create a sense of order first after this time of chaos and the Mongols fleeing. He needs to solidify the borders. He does have a strong military, but then he begins to centralize his power and create a Confucian bureaucracy. Brings back the civil service exams, trying to really erase all signs of Mongol presence. All right, this was a disgraceful time. He's going to rejuvenate China and make it Confucianist once again. He also is very, very wary of what went wrong with the old empires, and that would be corruption and the threat of sort of the noble class. And he wants to control these guys. So one thing he does is he abolishes the chief minister position and giving himself more absolute power. This is a major theme of the time period: absolutism, centralization of government, and the Ming are a prime example of it with Emperor Han Wu. Also, make sure you do the reading in the chapter to elaborate on this point. What reforms did Emperor Han Wu make to root out corruption and to grasp that absolute power? You also may want to take a look at the 2 images. There's a link to a YouTube clip about the changes in painting and the perception of Han Wu. The other thing they were doing is recovering and repairing their Neo-Confucianist ways. Confucianism now was being brought back in a better, stronger way, and that included a new social structure. As you see, the emperor and the royal family on top, followed by the strong scholar gentry class. It was their influence that's going to create the stability of this Chinese society. The peasant farmer, probably the most important piece of the Chinese society. The farmer providing the food for the people to survive. Artisans as well follow in that category. And on the bottom, though, are the merchants, who may develop great wealth, but not seen as very important in the Chinese Confucian society. Mostly because they're interested only in themselves and their own profit. And therefore, in order to gain status, they have to buy land. And so their profits go back into China. They begin to also to establish Confucian schools. And of course, I told you before, they brought back the civil service exam. But get this, there's a story of a student who dared to question a teacher. That student's head was chopped off, put on a stake, and posted outside of the school for all the other students to see. That's one way of handling student discipline problems. Also, the creation of block printing helped to mass produce written materials, which helped people become more literate. This also led to the creation of the first novel by the Chinese as well. The other major influence of Chinese society at the time we need to mention is the arrival of Jesuit missionaries bringing Christianity into China. Their goal was to make the emperor and royal family Christian so that it'll trickle down to the masses, but they had a hard time achieving that. So through all this, what they really were doing were rediscovering their identity, going back to their Confucian heritage, their Confucian traditions. And this is known as Neo-Confucianism. Now be sure to continue the chapter reading and answer the question about the various roles of women in Ming society as well. Another part of the recovery and repair was the population. Remember, the population was devastated by corruption, famine, plague. And so one of the things was to revitalize an agricultural foundation of their society, and also importing different crops from the Americas eventually helped the population boom. They also repaired canals, reservoirs, irrigation systems, and they planted over 1 billion trees to try to reforest China. And this would be very helpful, especially when it came to developing their navy. So they're recovering their population, they're repairing their infrastructure, and also they wanted to recover their economy. And by doing this, Hongwu wanted to set up a very efficient system of tax collection, using surveys, censuses to collect data. They also wanted to become active traders in the Indian Ocean trade route, trading silk, cotton, and fine porcelain for silver from Europe and Japan mostly. They also stressed internal trade because later on they could become very self-sufficient because of their mass size and resources that they have. So all of these things helped their economic recovery and really gave them now a sense of stability. And once you have order and stability, now you can begin to progress in other areas. And that's what happens with the emperors after Hongwu. One of those emperors is Emperor Yongle. So Emperor Yongle was really going to benefit from the foundation that Emperor Hongwu had left behind. But he still had some problems of his own. Part of that was to defend the northern borders, especially from Mongols who were still around and still a threat to the Ming. So he rebuilt and added to the Great Wall of China. He also repaired the Grand Canal that connected the Yellow River in the north, the Huanghe River, to the Yangtze in the south, to promote internal trade some more. He even wrote an encyclopedia with over 26,000 Confucian writings to really cement the idea that Confucianism was back. After the northern border was safe, he decided to create a new capital called Beijing, which means northern capital. So the Forbidden City really becomes the symbol of imperial power, the architectural symbol of the power of the emperor, upon the people. It was not easy to get into the Forbidden City, to see the emperor. Not many people did. And only eunuchs and concubines and some women could live in the Forbidden City. The only man that's present is the emperor. This was really going to set up Yangluo's next major project. In order to do this, he was going to create the greatest fleet the world had ever known, with the main purpose, really, of going around to all their neighbors and letting them know China's back. In order to do this, he uses his personal eunuch Zheng He and makes him Admiral of the Sea. And with this power, Zheng He goes on 7 voyages all throughout the known world, spreading the message that the Ming Dynasty is back. Now I want you to take a look at this video clip from the History Channel.
Between 1405 and 1433, the treasure fleet set out on 7 voyages into the unknown. At the helm of these vast armadas was a 2-meter-tall warrior navigator, the Muslim admiral of the fleet, Zheng He. By the end of his final voyage, his fleet had covered over 50,000 kilometers, having anchored in the most famous ports of the time. From China to India, from the Arabian Sea to the east coast of Africa, Zheng He led his ships further than anyone before. First rebuilding the Great Wall, Zhu Di then embarked on a massive shipbuilding program and appointed Zheng He as Admiral of the Western Seas, ordering him to go beyond the horizon. Comprising almost 28,000 men and over 300 ships known as swimming dragons, Zheng He's fleets included massive treasure galleons, which were technological marvels of the age. 400 feet long and 160 wide, with 9 masts, they were almost 5 times the size of Portuguese caravels, which would sail into the Indian Ocean only 50 years later. With a crew of 1,000 men, the ships took enough food to last them for years at sea, and included tubs of earth on deck so that vegetables and fruit could be grown. Beneath were kept the treasures with which to impress their hosts, while within watertight holds, horses were stowed for the cavalry. Zheng He often astonished his emperor by returning with extravagant tributes, of which the most amazing was acquired on his 4th voyage in 1414. In the kingdom of Bengal, Zheng persuaded the ruler to part with an animal given him by an African king. To much excitement, when the giraffe arrived at the imperial court in Beijing, the emperor's philosophers celebrated it as the fabled unicorn, an animal associated with an age of peace and prosperity. But after his death at sea on his 7th and final trip in 1433, a new emperor assumed the throne of the Ming dynasty and began to dismantle Zheng's navy, with the effect that China went from being a superpower into isolation.
So out of these amazing voyages of Zheng He, the best thing he could bring back to the Chinese emperor was a giraffe. So we'll take a look later and see what happened to Zheng He, what happened to the treasure fleet later on in the course. Right now, let's recap what we did learn about the Ming Dynasty as they become this re-emerged society in period 4. First, the recovery and repair. We learned that Emperor Hongwu was the one to put it all together. He looked to the past, he looked to Confucianism to bring order to the present and hopefully foundation for the future. In terms of rebuilding the dynasty, Emperor Yangluo continued on that foundation. He rebuilt the Great Wall, the Grand Canal, and continued to flex the power of the dynasty. And finally, in terms of the reconnaissance and creation of an empire, Emperor Yangluo sent Zheng He out on 7 voyages to gain respect and, most importantly, tribute from Ming China. If we focus on the major changes of the time period, number 1, we see the focus shifts from a land-based trade of the Silk Route, with the Mongols collapsing. That opens up now things for the sea-based Indian Ocean trade. In terms of continuities, we have a few things that continue to stay the same. The global need for Chinese goods continues as people all over the world still want silk, porcelain, tea, cotton, and other products from China. And China continues, at least till now, to have a favorable balance of trade. More on this tomorrow. Take it easy. Bye.